The dust on the road to Damascus was the color of old bone. It rose in pale clouds beneath the feet of horses and men, settling on lips, on eyelashes, on the coarse wool of traveling cloaks. It was the kind of dust that got into everything, into your water, into your prayers, into the corners of your mouth when you spoke. And on this particular morning, in the first decades after the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, one man was riding through that dust with murder in his heart, and he believed, with every fiber of his being, that God was pleased with him for it. His name was Saul. He was a Pharisee, trained at the feet of the great Rabbi Gamaliel in Jerusalem. He knew the Torah the way a musician knows a beloved instrument, every note, every nuance, every place where the melody turned. He was brilliant, burning, absolutely certain. And that certainty had lately turned into something dangerous. A movement was spreading through the Jewish world. Followers of a crucified carpenter from Galilee who called themselves the people of the way. They were saying that this Jesus had risen from the dead, that he was the Messiah, that everything had changed. To Saul, this was not good news. It was blasphemy. It was poison spreading through the body of Israel, and he had appointed himself the cure. He had already watched a young man named Stephen die under a hail of stones, had held the cloaks of the men who threw them. He had counted it as righteousness. Now, armed with letters of authority from the high priest, he was riding north toward Damascus, 200 miles from Jerusalem, to root out more of these followers and drag them back in chains. The question hanging over the road like the morning haze was this: what does God do with a man who is wrong about everything and certain he is right? The party had been traveling for days. The landscape had shifted from the golden hills around Jerusalem to the drier, rockier terrain of the Syrian approach. Damascus lay ahead, a great, ancient city, a crossroads of the world, home to a small and frightened community of believers who had likely already heard that Saul was coming. You have to pause and feel the weight of that. Somewhere in Damascus, mothers were whispering prayers. Men were wondering whether to run. They knew his name. They knew what he had done in Jerusalem, how he had gone house to house, dragging men and women out and throwing them into prison. The book of Acts tells us he was breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord. That is not a figure of speech. That is the portrait of a man consumed. And Saul himself, what was he feeling in those last miles? Righteous, focused, perhaps even exhilarated, the way a person feels when they are absolutely convinced that the cause they serve is holy. He was not a villain who knew he was a villain. He was a true believer, and that made him far more dangerous. His companions rode alongside him, and the road unwound beneath them like a pale ribbon through the scrubland, and the sun climbed higher, and Damascus grew closer. And then, it happened with no warning. The light came from somewhere that had no name. It was not the sun. The sun was already in the sky, and this was something else entirely, something that swallowed the sun the way a fire swallows a candle. It struck the road like a hammer. Every man in that company fell. The horses may have reared and screamed. The dust erupted. And Saul hit the ground hard. The breath knocked from him. His face pressed into that pale Syrian earth, and above the roaring light a voice spoke. Not in Greek. In Hebrew, the tongue of his fathers, the language of the Torah he had memorized and loved and wielded like a weapon. The voice said, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" 2 words. His name, spoken twice. There is mercy even in that. The way a father calls a child who has wandered into danger. Not one utterance of condemnation. Just a name. And then a question. Not an accusation. A question. Saul, trembling, his face still in the dirt, managed to ask, "Who are you, Lord?" And the answer that came back rearranged the entire universe he had built. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." Everything Saul believed about the world had a single keystone. The conviction that Jesus of Nazareth was not the Messiah, that his death had proven it, that the tomb had stayed closed. And now, in a blaze of impossible light, on an ordinary road, with his face in the dust, the keystone was being removed. Not gently, not philosophically. With a voice, a light, a presence so overwhelming that the men around him stood speechless, hearing sound but making no sense of it, seeing the light but not the one who spoke. Only Saul heard the words clearly. Only Saul was addressed. And only Saul knew what it meant. Every arrest he had made, every family he had broken, every stone that had struck Stephen while he held the coats. He had not been persecuting a sect. He had been persecuting the risen Lord himself. The voice gave him instructions. Rise, go into the city. You will be told what to do. Saul rose, and when he opened his eyes, the light was gone, and so was the world as he had known it. He was blind. 3 days he would remain so, no sight, no food, no water. Just darkness and silence and the slow, devastating work of God rearranging a soul from the inside out. His companions led him by the hand into Damascus. This man who had come to drag people away in chains was led down the street called Straight. You can still find it marked in Damascus today, and placed in the house of a man named Judas. And he waited. There, in that blindness, in that stillness, something extraordinary was happening. The walls of Saul's certainty were not just cracking. They were coming down entirely. And in the rubble, something new was beginning to breathe. God sent a man named Ananias, a follower of the way, one of the very people Saul had come to arrest. Ananias had heard from God in a vision that he was to go to Saul, and he had the courage to say, plainly, Lord, I have heard about this man, and all the harm he has done. He was afraid. Of course he was afraid. But he went. He went to the address on the street called Straight, and he walked in, and he placed his hands on the man who had terrorized his community, and he called him brother. The scales fell from Saul's eyes. He could see. He was baptized. He ate. He was filled with the Holy Spirit. And the man who had ridden into Damascus as the great destroyer of the church walked out of that house as its most improbable champion. What this story tells us is something that refuses to fit neatly inside human categories of possible and impossible. It tells us that no one is too far gone. Not the man breathing threats. Not the one who held the coats. Not the one who rode 200 miles in the wrong direction. Absolutely certain he was right. The light found Saul not because he was seeking God, but in spite of the fact that he was running from him with a sword. And that is the thing about grace. It does not wait politely for the right moment. It does not knock and then leave if no one answers. Sometimes it falls on you like noon light, sudden and blinding, on a road you never should have taken, and it calls you by your name. Twice, the way you call someone you love. And in the rearrangement that follows, in the blindness and the silence and the hands of the man you once hunted, a new story begins, built on the rubble of the old one, and it turns out to be more beautiful than anything you could have planned. The road to Damascus is long, and it changes everything it touches.